A hangar at Ellington Field in Houston empty now, but just minutes from now, a NASA plane will be pulling in with the one-year crew member Scott Kelly making his return home to the United States. Welcome from NASA's Johnson Space Center. Thanks for staying up late tonight with us. I'm Dan Hewitt. Again, Scott Kelly just minutes away now from a landing in Houston, just a little over 24 hours since touching down in wintry Kazakhstan after a historic 340 days in space. A lot of folks are going to be gathering out at Ellington to welcome Scott home. Among them, various dignitaries from the White House, including Dr. Jill Biden, the Second Lady of the United States, John Holdren, the White House science advisor, a number of NASA management folks, including Charles Bolden, the NASA administrator, Ellen Ochoa, the center director, and of course, Scott's friends and family. He's going to be looking forward to seeing his loved ones, his children, and his twin brother Mark Kelly and his wife Gabby Giffords all gathering out there at Ellington awaiting his return. Right now, that return is scheduled to come just about 10 minutes from now at 1:20 a.m. Central Time, 2:20 a.m. Eastern Time, and we'll be eagerly awaiting. We'll be giving you a live view of the landing, the taxi through the runway, and the pull-in to the hangar as we will wait for Scott to walk down the stairs just a few minutes later. Scott Kelly, of course, launched just about 1 year ago from Kazakhstan on March 27, 2015, when he would begin a historic stay on board the International Space Station. That launch coming from Baikonur when he was on board a Soyuz spacecraft along with Mikhail Kornienko, who spent the entire year with Scott. They launched with Gennady Padalka, the all-time record holder for time in space among all of humanity, launching flawlessly and arriving just 6 hours later. They made their way in and were welcomed by the current Expedition 43 crew on board, Terry Virts, Samantha Cristoforetti, and Anton Shkaplerov, who were already several months into their mission. But for Scott Kelly and Mikhail Kornienko, the first steps into the space station and what would be their home for the next 340 days. And of course, all of that came to a culmination just last night as Scott Kelly, Mikhail Kornienko, and Sergei Volkov said farewell to their crew members, and for Scott and Mikhail said farewell to their home in space for the last year. They said their final goodbyes and made their way into their Soyuz spacecraft, a different one than they arrived in. This one actually arrived to the station in September when Sergei Volkov flew with two visiting crew members to deliver the taxi up there and bring these crew members back home. The hatches were closed, and then after that, a series of leak checks just to make sure the vehicle was ready to make the trip home, everything going flawlessly yesterday evening. Here on the station, you can see the crew members who are still on board is Expedition 47, Tim Kopra, Tim Peake, and Yuri Malenchenko. We're going to continue all the science on board the station for the next several months. Once the hatch was closed on the Soyuz side and on the station side, a series of leak checks were completed, and then everything was set up for undocking. That undocking took place at 7:02 p.m. Central Time, 8:02 p.m. Eastern. The Soyuz slowly backing away at a snail-like rate of only 1/10 of a meter per second, and with that undocking, Expedition 47 officially beginning, but the beginning of a trip home for the one-year crew. Again, all of this happened just yesterday, March 1st, so we're a little over 24 hours from all of these events as we get ready to welcome Scott home to his first steps back on U.S. soil. That undocking coming successfully. This a view from the Soyuz as it looked down at the entire station structure and the Earth orbiting beneath it. It was only about 3.5 hours from that undocking, though, until it was time for the capsule to return home. The Soyuz spacecraft does so under a large parachute, setting up for an eventual touchdown in the Kazakh steppe and the vast expanses of the Kazakh deserts. As you can see, cloudy conditions, but fairly nice temperatures, the weather not too inclement out there, and the search and recovery forces, the various helicopters, the NASA, the Russian personnel able to track the capsule all the way down and get the crew members out safely and quickly. And this was, again, the first fresh of breath air for two of these crew members, Scott Kelly and Mikhail Kornienko, in over 340 days as they conducted that historic year on board the station. Sergei Volkov was the first out of the Soyuz capsule, and he was the commander of the vehicle last night for all of its events. Volkov, a veteran space flyer who was making his third flight on board the International Space Station, well in excess of 500 days on his all-time spaceflight resume. For Scott Kelly and Mikhail Kornienko, it was 340 days, and all told, they spent 5,440 orbits around our planet. Now, when you rack up the mileage on that, that's 143 million miles, coincidentally about the same distance you would have to travel if you were on a mission to Mars. And this one-year mission, the next step in the International Space Station's use as a platform for preparing us for that journey to Mars. Again, this view from yesterday, it was evening here in Houston when the crew touched down, but morning out in Kazakhstan, about 12 hours ahead of us here in Houston. Kelly giving a lot of thumbs up there on the ground, reporting he was doing well. And now we're getting reports the plane about to land at Ellington, so we will cut out live, and there it is, the NASA plane down on the field in Ellington. Scott Kelly back here in Houston. So on board this plane, Scott Kelly is joined by a crew of NASA personnel who made the trip out to Kazakhstan to bring him home as quickly, as expeditiously as possible. This done on the NASA plane to get these crew members hopefully within 24 hours or so after their landing, so they can begin giving medical tests, various data takes to all of the scientists and medical personnel responsible for doing all of the science around their missions. Of course, many of the crew members liken themselves to guinea pigs at times, but they are themselves very much the experiment, and a lot of the work still to come for Scott Kelly is just because he's not in space anymore doesn't mean the science stops, so a lot of work still to go for him. But Scott Kelly in the NASA plane taxiing on the runway now down at Ellington in Houston. And again, at this point, Scott's friends, family, invited guests, and various dignitaries are there out at Ellington. They'll await for the plane to pull into the hangar, at which point, before they can say hello to Scott, there's actually a bit of processing he'll have to go through. Scott and everybody on board will be going through the exact same U.S. Customs and Border Protection processing as any U.S. citizen would returning to the United States. So, believe it or not, a trip into outer space treated much like a trip overseas to any other country. So for Scott Kelly, that'll be the first order of business before he's able to get off the plane. And you can see all of the various friends, family, NASA dignitaries, and those from the White House accompanying Second Lady Dr. Jill Biden to welcome Scott home after a historic mission. Here now, the NASA plane pulling into the hangar out at Ellington. It's made the trip in under 24 hours now, stopping twice for fueling on the way back from Zhezkazgan, Kazakhstan. The plane did hit a bit of inclement weather and crosswinds, so our landing a little bit delayed if you've been following along, but the plane now on the ground pulling into the hangar out there at Ellington. And with that, the plane comes to a stop. Again, the first order of business going to be that customs processing for everybody on board. Is this stop in Houston is the first port of call for them on returning to the United States. And once that's complete, we'll begin to see the friends, family, guests, and other dignitaries begin to file in and get ready to welcome Scott home after his stay in space.